"Your coat looks like it came from a clearance rack," Clara sneered, and laughter rippled through the banquet hall. Jason smirked, calling her nothing but a doll princess barging into a $200 million negotiation. Victor cut her off with a cold voice. "This deal is far beyond your league." Shareholders whispered she only knew handbags, not numbers, while guests chuckled at the sight of her left standing. But the room froze when Arya calmly laid down a document. She owned 35% of Langford Group's voting rights. Arya stood there, her plain gray coat hanging loose on her shoulders, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, just her standing in a room full of tailored suits and glittering dresses. The banquet hall was all crystal chandeliers and polished marble, the kind of place where every detail screamed money. She didn't fit, and they made sure she knew it. Clara, with her sharp cheekbones and diamond earrings, leaned forward, her voice dripping with fake pity. "Sweetheart, did you get lost on your way to the thrift store?" The laughter came again, louder this time, like a wave crashing over her. Arya didn't flinch. She just looked at Clara, her eyes steady, and adjusted the strap of her old canvas bag. A woman in a sleek black gown, her nails painted blood red, leaned toward her date, and stage whispered, "Look at her shoes. Did she borrow them from a maid?" The room tittered, heads turning to catch a glimpse of Arya's worn flats. She shifted her weight, the soles scuffing softly against the floor, and opened her notebook. Her pen moved deliberately, scratching out a note as if the room's laughter was just background noise. A man with a slick-back ponytail and a gold cufflink snorted. "She's writing poetry now!" This isn't a creative writing class. Arya's hand paused just for a heartbeat before she flipped the page and kept going. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was a wall, and they couldn't break through it. Jason, all slick hair and smug grin, leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of wine. "What's a doll princess like you doing here? This isn't a tea party." He was Victor's son, the kind of guy who wore his privilege like a badge and his bitterness like a second skin. Years ago, Arya had turned him down politely, quietly, but firmly. He hadn't forgotten. His words landed hard, and a few shareholders snickered their eyes, darting to her scuffed shoes. One of them, a balding man with a gold watch, muttered just loud enough, "She's probably here to take selfies, not sign contracts." Arya's fingers tightened on her bag, but her face stayed calm. She didn't say a word. Not yet. A server carrying a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres paused near Arya, then deliberately turned away, offering the tray to a group of chuckling guests instead. The slight was subtle, but it cut deep, a reminder that even the help saw her as an outsider. Arya's eyes followed the server for a moment, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small worn leather planner, its edges frayed from years of use. She opened it to a marked page, revealing a handwritten note in her father's precise script. "Trust your instincts, Arya." She traced the words with her finger, then closed the planner with a soft snap, her posture straightening as the room's laughter faded into the background. Victor Harrington, the man at the head of the table, didn't even look up from his papers. He was all business, his gray suit crisp, his voice like ice. "Miss Langford, you're out of your depth. This is a $200 million deal, not a charity auction." The room went quiet, waiting for her to shrink. She didn't. Instead, she stepped forward, her shoes clicking softly on the marble floor, and slid a single sheet of paper onto the table. It was a shareholder agreement, stamped and notarized. Her name was there in bold: Arya Langford. 35% voting rights. Langford Group. The whispers stopped. Clara's smile faltered. Jason's glass froze halfway to his lips. Arya just stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, and let the silence speak. The banquet hall felt different now, like the air had shifted. People shuffled papers, cleared throats, avoided her eyes. But Arya wasn't done. She opened her bag, pulled out a small notebook, and flipped it open. "I have some questions about the deal," she said, her voice soft but clear, like she was asking about the weather. Victor's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone like her, someone who looked like she didn't belong. A woman in a red dress, her hair piled high, leaned over to her friend and whispered, "Who does she think she is?" Arya's pen paused on the page just for a second before she kept writing. That pause, it said everything. It said she heard, and it hurt, but she wasn't going to let it stop her. A waiter balancing a tray of champagne flutes hesitated near Arya, his eyes flicking to her plain coat before he moved on to serve the others. The snub was small, but it stung, a reminder that even the staff saw her as less. She set her notebook down, her movements slow, deliberate, and pulled out a single folded letter from her bag. It was old, the edges worn, the Langford Group letterhead barely visible. She smoothed it out on the table, her fingers lingering on her father's signature at the bottom. The room didn't notice, too busy with their drinks and their whispers, but a young assistant at the edge of the crowd froze, her eyes widening as she recognized the seal. Arya didn't look at her. She just tucked the letter away and stood a little straighter. They moved to a private meeting room after the banquet, the kind of place with leather chairs and a long mahogany table. The deal was supposed to be sealed here, away from the crowd. Victor sat at one end, his hands folded, his face unreadable. Clara stood behind him, her arms crossed, her lips curled into a smirk. Jason slouched in his chair, scrolling on his phone like he was bored. The shareholders, 5 or 6 of them, filled the other seats, their eyes darting between Arya and the Harringtons. She sat alone on her side of the table, her laptop open, her coat draped over the chair. Jason looked up, his voice sharp. Inherited shares don't make you powerful, Arya. They just make you lucky. The words stung, but she didn't blink. She just tapped a key on her laptop and kept her eyes on the screen. Clara laughed, a high, brittle sound. A woman should choose gowns, not contracts. You're embarrassing yourself, dear. The shareholders chuckled, one of them, a man with a silk tie and a fake tan, adding, "She thinks she's clever, doesn't she?" Arya's fingers stopped on the keyboard. She looked up, her gaze locking on Clara's. "Is that what you think?" she asked, her voice so calm it was almost unnerving. The room went quiet again. Clara's smirk faded, and she looked away, fussing with her bracelet. Victor leaned forward, his voice low. "Push too far, Miss Langford, and we'll walk away from this deal entirely." Arya didn't answer. She just turned her laptop so everyone could see the screen. One of the shareholders, a woman with a tight bun and a pearl brooch, leaned forward, her voice syrupy with condescension. "Darling, you're playing with fire. You think you can just waltz in here with a laptop and scare us?" She gestured at Arya's bag, her lip curling. "What's next? Pulling out a calculator to do the math for us." The room erupted in laughter, heads thrown back, glasses clinking. Arya's hand rested on her laptop, her fingers still. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes moving from the woman to the screen. Without a word, she pressed a key and the laughter died, as the screen flickered to life with a new set of documents, bank transfers, coded messages, all tied to Victor's name. The woman's brooch glinted as she sank back in her chair, her face pale. A junior executive, his tie slightly crooked, tried to lighten the mood, his voice overly cheerful. "Hey, Arya, let's not get carried away. We're all friends here, right?" He flashed a grin, but it wavered when she didn't return it. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a single photograph, placing it face up on the table. It showed Victor shaking hands with a known offshore banker, the timestamp clear in the corner. The junior executive's grin vanished, his hand hovering over his coffee cup before he pushed it away. The room's energy shifted, the air growing heavier, as eyes darted to the photo, then away like it burned to look at it. The screen lit up with a spreadsheet, rows and columns of numbers, and at the top, a subject line, Harrington Offshore Accounts. Arya clicked a button, and an email chain appeared, Victor's name clear as day, discussing a plan to funnel the $200 million project through a fake subsidiary in the Cayman Islands. The room felt like it had been sucked dry of air. Jason's phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the table. Clara's face went pale, her bracelet forgotten. Victor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. A shareholder, a woman with a pearl necklace, stammered, This can't be real." Arya didn't say anything. She just leaned back in her chair, her hands folded, and let the emails do the talking. A man in a pinstripe suit, his cufflinks flashing under the fluorescent lights, stood up, his voice booming. "This is a stunt. You're forging documents to make a scene." He pointed at Arya, his finger trembling with rage. "You're nothing but a spoiled brat trying to play grown-up." The other shareholders nodded, their murmurs, growing louder, feeding off his anger. Arya didn't respond. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, unmarked envelope. She slid it across the table, her movements slow, almost gentle. The man hesitated, then snatched it up, ripping it open. Inside was a printed email signed by his own CFO, confirming the offshore plan. His face crumpled and he sat down hard, the envelope falling to the floor. The meeting didn't end there. It couldn't. Victor stood up of his chair, scraping against the floor. "Spread lies like this and you'll face court," he snapped, his voice, shaking just enough to betray him. Clara stepped forward, her hands clasped together like she was praying. "No one will believe a child's fantasy," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. Jason slammed his fist on the table, his face red. "You've got no legal proof, Arya. You're a joke." The shareholders started muttering, their voices rising, one of them shouting, "Throw her out!" Another, a gray-haired man with a Rolex, hissed, "Even her father doesn't trust her with real responsibility." Arya didn't move. She just reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive. She plugged it in and the screen changed again. This time, it was surveillance footage, grainy but clear enough. Jason in his father's office signing a contract with the fake subsidiary's name. The date stamp showed it was 3 weeks ago. The room went dead silent. Victor's hands clenched into fists. Clara sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Jason stared at the screen, his mouth open like he was trying to find words that wouldn't come. Arya stood up, closed her laptop, and slid it into her bag. "I think we're done here," she said, her voice still calm, still steady. She turned to leave her coat brushing against the chair, and the sound of her footsteps echoed in the silence. A young shareholder barely older than Arya, with gelled hair and a nervous smile, tried to break the tension. "Come on, Arya, let's not get dramatic. You've made your point. Sit down, have a drink." He pushed a glass of water toward her, his hand shaking slightly. The gesture was meant to be kind, but it felt like pity, and the room watched, waiting for her to take it. Arya looked at the glass, then at him. "I don't drink with people who lie to my face," she said, her voice quiet but sharp enough to cut. She pushed the glass back, the water sloshing slightly, and the young man's smile vanished. The room felt heavier, the air thick with the weight of her words. But they weren't done. Not yet. Victor's voice broke through, desperate now. "We can renegotiate," he said, stepping toward her. "Let's erase this, start over." Clara dropped to her knees, her dress pooling around her. "Please, Arya, it was all a misunderstanding." Jason's hands were shaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "I only did what Dad told me." One of the shareholders, the man with the silk tie, leaned forward with his eyes wide. "Sign anyway, Miss Langford. We'll all be rich." Another guest, a woman in a sequin gown, scoffed. "She'll ruin $200 million just to act proud." Arya paused at the door, her hand on the knob. She didn't turn around. "Langford Group is moving the deal to your rival," she said, and walked out. As she stepped into the hallway, a security guard, his badge glinting under the lights, approached her, his face stern. "Ms., you need to leave the premises. You're causing a disturbance." The words hit like a slap, and a few guests nearby smirked, their phones already out recording. Arya stopped, her hand tightening on her bag. She looked at the guard, her eyes steady, and pulled out a business card. Her name, her title, Langford Group's logo. "Call your supervisor," she said, her voice even almost kind. The guard hesitated, then took the card, his fingers fumbling as he dialed. A moment later, his face changed, and he stepped back, muttering an apology. Arya didn't wait for more. She walked past him, her head high, the smirks fading behind her. The news hit like a bomb. Phones started buzzing, screens lighting up with alerts. Harrington Corp's stock was crashing, the numbers dropping faster than anyone could process. The shareholders scrambled, shouting into their phones, trying to salvage what they could. Victor stood frozen, his face gray. Clara was still on the floor, her mascara smudged. Jason stared at the door like he couldn't believe she'd actually done it. Arya didn't look back. She walked through the banquet hall, past the chandeliers, past the guests who were now whispering about her instead of at her. Her phone vibrated in her bag, but she didn't check it. She just kept walking, her head high, her steps steady. Outside, a group of reporters had gathered, their cameras flashing as Arya emerged from the building. One of them, a woman with a sharp bob and a microphone, pushed forward. "Miss Langford, is it true you've tanked Harrington Corp?" The question was loud, meant to provoke. Arya paused, her coat catching the wind, and turned to face the reporter. "I didn't tank anything," she said, her voice clear, unwavering. "I just brought the truth to light." The cameras clicked faster, but she didn't stay for more questions. She walked on, leaving the reporters scrambling to capture her retreating figure, her silhouette steady against the city lights. Outside, the night was cool, the city lights blurring in the distance. Arya stopped for a moment, her breath visible in the air. She pulled her coat tighter, and her fingers brushed against an old photo in her pocket. A faded picture of her and her dad back when she was a kid, standing in front of a beat-up old car. He'd taught her to drive in that car, laughing when she stalled it on a hill. The memory hit hard, and her hand lingered on the photo before she tucked it away. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The weight of the night was enough, and she carried it quietly like she always had. A street vendor, his cart steaming with the smell of roasted chestnuts, glanced at Arya as she passed. "Hey lady, You look like you need a warm snack," he called, his voice friendly but tinged with pity. He held out a paper bag, the kind of gesture you'd make to someone who looked down on their luck. Arya paused, her eyes meeting his. "I'm good," she said, her voice soft but firm, and she slipped a 20 into his tip jar without taking the bag. The vendor blinked, caught off guard, then nodded, a small smile breaking through. Arya kept walking the city's hum, wrapping around her the weight of the night, lifting just a fraction. Back inside, the chaos was still unfolding. A shareholder, the one with the gold watch, was on the phone, his voice frantic. "She's ruined us," he kept saying like it was a mantra. Another, the woman with the pearl necklace, was scrolling through her tablet, her face pale as she read the headlines. Harrington Corp accused of fraud. One said, "Langford Group pulls $200 million. Deal said, another, Arya's name was everywhere, but not as a doll princess anymore. The narrative had shifted, and it wasn't going back. The next day, the fallout started to settle. Victor was called into an emergency board meeting, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot. By noon, the board had voted him out. Clara's social media was flooded with comments, old friends unfollowing her, her carefully curated image crumbling. Jason's sponsorship deals, those flashy ads for sports cars and watches, were pulled within hours, the companies citing reputational concerns. The shareholders weren't spared either. The man with the silk tie lost his seat on 2 boards, his name tied to the scandal. The woman in the sequined gown was dropped from her charity gala committee, her phone silent for the first time in years. A journalist, her notepad clutched tightly, caught up with Clara outside the meeting room, shoving a microphone in her face. "Mrs. Harrington, did you know about the offshore accounts?" Clara's face twisted, her hands shaking as she pushed past. "No comment," she snapped, but her voice was thin like paper tearing. The journalist scribbled furiously, her eyes gleaming with the scoop. Back in the room, the woman with the pearl brooch was whispering to another shareholder, her voice low but panicked. She planned this. She knew everything. The words hung in the air, a confession of their own defeat, as the headlines kept rolling in. Arya didn't see any of this. She was already somewhere else in a small office across town, meeting with the rival company's team. They greeted her with handshakes, their voices respectful, their eyes curious. She sat at the head of the table, her laptop open again, but this time no one laughed, no one whispered. When she spoke, they listened. She laid out the new deal, clean, transparent, no offshore tricks. The numbers added up, and so did her authority. One of the executives, a woman with short gray hair, smiled at her. "You're not what we expected," she said. Arya just nodded, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. During a break, an older executive, his glasses perched on his nose, approached Arya, holding a coffee cup. "You remind me of your father," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. He glanced at a photo on the wall, an old shot of her dad shaking hands at a deal, signing, his smile wide. Arya's eyes flicked to the photo, her hand stilling on her bag. She didn't speak, but her lips pressed together just for a moment before she nodded. The executive stepped back, giving her space, and the room hummed with a new kind of respect. Arya turned back to her notes, her pen moving again, steady as ever. The meeting stretched into the afternoon, and Arya was about to leave when the door opened. A man walked in, tall, quiet, his suit simple but sharp. He didn't need to introduce himself. The room knew who he was. Ethan Caldwell, CEO of the rival company, the one who'd been watching the Harrington deal from the sidelines. He shook Arya's hand, his grip firm, his eyes steady. "You did good," he said, and the room felt smaller, like his presence changed the gravity. One of the executives coughed, another looked away. The woman with the gray hair smiled again, but this time it was different, knowing, almost proud. As Ethan spoke, a junior analyst, her laptop balanced on her knees, accidentally knocked over a stack of papers. They scattered across the floor, one sheet landing near Arya's feet. She bent down, picking it up, and her eyes caught a handwritten note in the margin. "Langford's daughter, check her voting power." The analyst flushed, scrambling to gather the rest, but Arya handed the paper back without a word. Her face didn't change, but her fingers lingered on the edge of the sheet, a quiet acknowledgement of the game she'd already won. The room watched, the tension palpable, as she returned to her seat, her presence commanding without effort. Victor's voice echoed in Arya's mind, unbidden from the night before. "No one respects you, they only want your surname." Clara's words came next, sharp and cruel. "You'll die alone." Jason's sneer followed. "If not with me, no man will have you." And the guests laughing, "She'll be Wall Street's laughing stock." They'd all been wrong. Arya stood there, her hand still in Ethan's, and the weight of their words fell away. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. The proof was in the room, in the deal, in the way Ethan looked at her, not as a savior, but as an equal. Ethan stepped forward, addressing the room. "Aria isn't just a billionaire's daughter," he said, his voice low but clear. "She's my new partner and the woman I choose for life." The executives froze. The woman with the gray hair clapped, breaking the silence, and soon the room was buzzing, hands reaching out to congratulate her. Aria didn't smile, but her eyes softened just for a moment as she looked at Ethan. She didn't need rescuing. She never had. But being seen, really seen, that was something else. The deal was signed that day, the papers passed around, pens scratching against the pages. Aria's name was there, right next to Ethan's, and it wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, about power, about a future she'd built with her own hands. The Harringtons were a footnote now, their empire crumbling under the weight of their own lies. Aria didn't need to look back to know it. She could hear it in the silence of her phone, in the way the city seemed to hum a little differently around her. As she left the office, a young intern, her badge still shiny, approached Aria, holding out a pen she'd dropped. "Miss Langford, you forgot this," she said, her voice nervous but warm. Aria took the pen, her fingers brushing the intern's, and for a moment their eyes met. The intern's face lit up like she had just seen something she'd been waiting for. Aria nodded, slipping the pen into her bag, and walked on. That small moment, that quiet exchange, it was a reminder that not everyone judged her by her coat. She walked out of the office, Ethan beside her, their steps in sync. The city was alive, cars honking, lights flickering, people rushing past. Aria's coat was still plain, her bag still old, but no one looked twice. Not anymore. She stopped at a crosswalk, her hand brushing against that photo in her pocket again. Her dad's laugh echoed in her memory, and for the first time that day, her lips curved into a small, quiet smile. She'd done it. Not for him, not for them, but for herself. The consequences kept rolling out, quiet but relentless. Victor's face was on every business channel, his resignation letter trending online. Clara's charity events were canceled, her name blacklisted from the elite circles she'd clung to. Jason's social media was a ghost town, his posts buried under a flood of criticism. The shareholders scrambled, but the damage was done. Their names were tied to the scandal, their reputation shredded. It wasn't revenge. It was just the truth catching up, like it always does. "You've been there, haven't you?" Felt the sting of being underestimated, overlooked, laughed at. You've carried that weight, kept your head down, and kept going. You weren't wrong to stay strong. You weren't alone in that fight. And you're not alone now. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.